Ladies and gentlemen, the Special Investigative Commission was established by the Icelandic Parliament, Alþingi, in December 2008 to investigate and analyze the events that led to the collapse of the three principal banks in Iceland. The Commission was to present its finding in a report to Alþingi. Today, the report was presented to the Speaker of Alþingi, and access to the report has been opened for the general public on the website of Alþingi, which also contains English version of parts of the report. The Commission is chaired by a Supreme Court Justice, and its other two members are Icelandic Parliamentary Ombudsman and a lecturer and associate chair at Yale University. In its work, the Commission was assisted by up to 50 part- and full-time experts. The Commission's investigation has thus first and foremost focused on the activities of the large Icelandic banks, namely Glitnir Bank, Landsbanki Íslands, and Kaupthing Bank, prior to the collapse in October 2008. A focus was also placed on a comparison with individual factors with other Icelandic financial institutions that collapsed at the beginning of 2009. The Commission furthermore investigated the arrangement of the national authority supervision and monitoring of the banks and measures for responding in a possible financial crisis prior to the collapse. Over 300 persons provided the Commission with information, and 147 persons at formal hearings by the Commission. The printed version of the report by the Commission has just over 2,300 pages. Hence, it is impossible for us to address all our conclusions at such a short meeting as this one. The report's version on the website is more than 1,000 pages larger. The report is an information and data publication containing information and facts where the Commission attempts to provide an overall illustration of what happened prior to the collapse of the banks in 2008. The Commission was not intended to conduct a criminal investigation. Instead, it was to notify the Director of Public Prosecutions if suspicion arose of culpable conduct. It is then up to the Director of Public Prosecutions to determine what steps should be taken. During the debate in the Alþingi on the parliamentary bill on the establishment of the Special Investigative Commission, several members of Parliament emphasized that the investigation marked, to a certain extent, the beginning of reform that needs to take place in Iceland in the wake of the collapse of the Icelandic banks, and that this was definitely not to be construed as the end of the matter. Ladies and gentlemen, I now give the floor to Commission member Dr. Sigríður Benediktsdóttir, who will discuss the main causes of the collapse of the banks in 2008.
I just wanted to start by pointing out that there are some chapters of the report that have already been translated into English, such as the executive summary, a chapter on foreign deposits at branches, Icelandic branches, and also the summary chapter that is 150-page long and pretty detailed. Otherwise, I just want to start by talking about the main reasons for the collapse of the banks. The main cause of the failure of the banks was the rapid growth of the banks and their size at the time of the collapse. The big three banks grew 20-fold in size in 7 years. Such growth is commonly associated with poor underwriting standards and poor record keeping, which can lead to solvency-related difficulties within a few years. The quality of the Icelandic banks' loan portfolios eroded under these circumstances. This rapid growth was not compatible with long-term interest of a strong bank. Within the banks, there were also very strong incentives for growth, and also from the owners of the banks. As you can see, the loan book grew the most, both in loans to holding companies and to foreign entities. I will, however, want to point out that foreign entities does not mean foreigners, as it can be a firm abroad that is owned by an Icelander, which was very common. The opening of the global debt financing markets to Iceland drove the growth of the banks. The Icelandic bank received high credit ratings, which was mostly inherited from Iceland's sovereign debt ratings. During 2005, the three banks issued around 14 billion euros in foreign debt securities, mostly on the European medium note term market. This was little over the GDP of Iceland of that year. That would be equal to US fetching $14 trillion in debt markets. Most of the funding matured in 3 to 5 years. Refinancing risk, therefore, was imminent. In early 2006, this became apparent, and global financial markets closed their doors for a short period. Funding dried up. But later that year, funding opened up, especially in the US, where the Icelandic banks had very high credit rating in comparison to the interest rate they were paying. Hence, they were prime for putting into CDOs. Early in 2000, once the liquidity crisis started in 2007, foreign deposits and short-term securities funding became the main source of funding for the three banks. And when I say short-term security funding, that is actually kind of repurchasing agreements. The only difference was that the ownership of the securities did not transfer from the banks to the lender. This short-term funding was very sensitive to any kind of market conditions and credit ratings. At the time of the collapse, repayment schedules of the outstanding of the banks was steep. In the first 6 months after the takeover of Glitnir, almost 4 billion euros were on maturity by the three big banks. And in comparison, our currency, the currency held by the central bank was 2.5 billion euros, much lower than that. The repayment schedule of collateralized loans was also steep, as more than 9 billion euros were outstanding at the collapse. And like you know, for these repurchasing agreements, maturity is within a week, 2 weeks, up to 6 months. Why was the growth of the banks this troublesome? It affected the credibility of the system. Other countries with relatively large financial systems managed to avoid disastrous banking outcomes, since unlike Iceland, those nations have long experience and proven ability to supervise large international banks. Their accumulated reputation for careful prudential supervision therefore offsets their inability to provide fully reliable lender of last resort protection, at least to some extent. FME, which is the Financial Supervision Authority, was in general understaffed and lacked experience. FME also did not enforce legal provisions which were at their disposal, despite seeing laws broken. The Central Bank of Iceland had a currency reserve which was pretty low, at least if you look at the sizing of the financial system. And also in comparison to the economy's short-term liabilities. And with short-term liabilities, I'm talking about anything that's up due within 12 months. Debt due within 12 months in foreign currency in Iceland was 16-fold the currency reserve. Hence, pretty apparent if the krona would depreciate, we would be in very deep trouble. Foreign currency deposits grew to be 8-fold the central bank's foreign currency reserve. This increased the risk of a run on the banks. On top of this, which also came apparent in foreign press, our deposit insurance fund was underfunded, thus decreasing the credibility of the system even further. This all led to the fact that the likelihood of a run, both on deposits and other means of funding, was high. And in effect, a full-force run began in March 2008. where over a period of 6 weeks, approximately £1 billion were withdrawn from UK branches of Icesave. But we were able to prevail at that point. We find that the owners of all 3 banks had abnormally easy access to loans in these banks, and apparently in their capacity as owners. The largest exposure of all 3 banks, Glitnir, Kaupthing Banki, and Landsbanki, were the bank's principal owners. This raises the question as to whether the lending was done at arm's length. The operations of the bank were in many ways characterized by their maximizing the benefit of the majority shareholders who held the reins within the banks, rather than by running reliable banks with interest of all shareholders, and to show due responsibility towards creditors. In late 2007 and 2008, the banks began to experience funding problems like many other international banks. It seems that at that point, the boundaries between the interests of the banks and the interests of the shareholders, the majority shareholders, were often blurry, and that the banks put more emphasis on backing up their owners than can be considered acceptable. Examination of the investments made by the money market funds also, which were operated and managed by companies of the 3 banks, which are supposed to be independent, also reveal that the prime investments of these companies were securities that came from the owners of the banks. And deposits, if there were any, were at the bank that owned the company. We find that this investment decision cannot have been determined by coincidence alone.